Thanks for welcoming us into your homes today. My name is Andrew, and my wife and I, along with a team of great people, are planting Radiant Church this fall in the Seneca, Clemson area of South Carolina. If you'd like more information about us, visit radiantchurchsc.com, and I'll fill you in more on how you can be a part of Radiant Church from wherever you might be at the end of our talk here today. Now, unless you've been sort of on a 90-day retreat somewhere where you unplugged from the world around you, you've noticed that there's quite a bit happening, right? And it doesn't take long to start wondering as you're watching the news and you're scrolling through your social media feed, where is God in the middle of all of this, right? In the middle of the tension and the chaos and the uncertainty, it doesn't seem to make sense. I mean, it feels like God, in some ways, is taking a back seat. And that feeling might have been prevalent for many of you before 2020 started, but now it really feels like God is just distant or just doesn't really care about all the things that keep popping up in this year, right? And there are certainly times where I know I've thought, hey, if I were God, I would have handled this totally differently. And maybe you thought that as well a time or two. But now, to be fair, before we keep going in this message, I want to be clear with you. We're not going to offer practical, easy to follow steps, okay? It's going to be a little bit tougher to digest and take in the message we're going to talk about today because when you tackle difficult issues, that's kind of what you expect, right? But what God is or isn't doing to so many of us doesn't seem to make sense right now. And the answers that we'll reach are not neatly packaged, but they are real answers. And so with the way that things are happening all around us, I think we have some difficult questions we're all asking that really need answers, not pie-in-the-sky stuff, real answers. So what do you do when God doesn't make sense? We're going to unpack this over the next few weeks, starting with a difficult question today that many of us have asked a time or two, and that's this. What do you do when God doesn't seem to be listening? So you've been praying and praying and praying and praying, but it doesn't seem like God is hearing anything you're saying, right? Next week, we'll answer another question, like what do you do when God is late? So you've been waiting for God to act. Maybe you've been waiting for God to act for years. Nothing has been happening. It's frustrating. And that final week, we'll answer this question, what do I do when God is uncooperative? Like you expect God to do one thing, and he does something completely different. Now, how many of you would say like you've prayed for something? You've prayed and prayed and prayed some more, but it just seems like God isn't really listening. Yeah, like me too. I've been there, all right? And I'll confess something else to you this morning. People don't make this any easier. So you've got that one person who prays to God for every single thing. And it seems like that prayer is always answered. You had a bad week, but they prayed for a miracle and it happened. And then they prayed for God to provide and someone paid it forward in the drive-thru and they ate for free. And then they're a Cubs fan and they're praying for the World Series. And you're like, man, can the Braves just get back to the World Series, Or you hear all the preacher stories about how somebody met somebody else on a plane or in a store, it's like, I found them on aisle 6. They were a crack-smoking, palm-reading person, and they wanted to read my palms, and so I showed them, and they started to read it. They're like, oh, man, your palms make a cross. And I said, that's right, because Jesus died on the cross for me, and he died for you. Would you like to receive him now? And that person's like, yes! And then people on aisle 7 heard, and they wanted Jesus too, and half the store got saved, and they quit their jobs, and they went on the mission field, and today, they're reaching all the nations for Jesus. Isn't that great, All right. So you hear stories. Maybe that's a little bit of exaggeration, but you hear stories, okay? And you think, like, that stuff never happens to me. And you look at your friends and your family and you see that they have all the things you'd like to have. They have a good job, a nice house, great family, and they're not even following Jesus. And here you are, man, Jesus follower Mike or Sue or whoever you might be, and you've been faithful and committed your life, and it's just like one big struggle for you. And that doesn't even seem right. That doesn't make sense. You look at the world around you and you see people spewing hate at each other, and you see violence and you see conflict, and you start thinking, I thought God was good. Like I thought God cared. I thought God was in all of this, but none of it seems to make sense. So where is God? You can't find him active in your life. You can't find him active in your world as you pray, and nothing seems to happen. It just seems like God isn't listening, almost like he doesn't care. And so what do you do then when you pray and God seems silent? And if you take nothing else away from our talk today, I want you to grab hold of this, okay? Grab a hold of this right here for dear life. Just because God is silent doesn't mean God is absent. Just because you may not hear him doesn't mean he doesn't hear you. Just because you don't feel his presence doesn't mean he's not with you. He's silent, but he's not absent. And this is nothing new. In fact, it's something that one of the most amazing figures in history dealt with is a guy by the name of John. Now, I don't know how familiar you might be with the story of John the Baptist. If you're not familiar with the story, you probably wonder why is the word Baptist attached to his name. He was known as the Baptist because he baptized so many people during his time in ministry during the first century. He was also a little weird. He's a little eccentric kind of guy. He wore clothes made from camel's hair and animal skins. He ate wild honey and locusts. I always envisioned John as like the first century Jewish version of Grizzly Adams, okay? So he was actually Jesus' cousin, and the main mission that he had that was central to his ministry was to point people right back to Jesus. Now, Jesus hadn't arrived in the scene yet. He wasn't publicly ministering, but John was getting everything ready for when that moment would come. He was preparing the way. Now, finally, Jesus does come, and John baptizes him, and from that point on, Jesus' public ministry begins. Now, one other important note about John before we move any further, okay? He spoke with boldness. So much so, he was wildly popular among the people. And that attitude of standing for the truth, no matter what, it got him in trouble with the Roman-backed governor of his region, a man named Herod Antipas. Now, Herod was married. This is actually really important for where our story is going to go today, because he had a thing for his brother's wife. Oh, you heard that right. He's married, but he looks at his sister-in-law with googly eyes, man. And he actually divorces his wife. He marries his brother's wife, a man named Herodias. Now, can you imagine that scandal happening in our world today? Like TMZ would blow up, right? Now, there was a massive scandal in the first century, too. And our buddy John, he was one of the few to actually speak out against what happened. Herod, though, respected John, oddly enough. He really believed that John was a godly man, and he bought into everything that John said. But Herodias hated his guts. And to appease his new wife, what Herod did was he had John arrested, but he wouldn't kill him despite Herodias' best efforts to get the job done. So let's pick it up right here with John in jail, Mark chapter 6. In Mark 6, verse number 17. For Herod had sent soldiers to arrest and imprison John as a favor to Herodias. Now, she had been his brother Philip's wife. Again, kind of weird. But Herod had married her. So John had been telling Herod, it's against God's law for you to marry your brother's wife. So Herodias bore a grudge against John and wanted to kill him. But without Herod's approval, she was powerless. Oh, remember that last part. It'll come back. Now imagine you're John. You spent your whole life ministering to people, preparing the way for Jesus' arrival. You baptized Jesus, and he's doing all kinds of miracles and starting to wield significant influence. So what do you think Jesus is going to do when he learns that you're in prison? Yeah, like you're thinking, oh, okay, it's my time, right? It's my time. My miracle's coming. It's got my name on it, John, It's on the way. I stood up for him. I baptized him. I got everything ready for him. Now he's going to come, and he's going to get me right on out of prison. And so John, he waits, and he waits, and he waits some more, and Jesus never comes. He doesn't break him out. He doesn't send in one of his followers to go get him. He doesn't send angels in just to open up the doors. Like, Jesus doesn't do a thing. He just keeps teaching and performing miracles and doing all this for other people but John, who did everything for Jesus. Now, that's not a great feeling, right? So John starts to ask some questions, and he's definitely wondering, hey, Jesus, are you who I thought you were? Now, you got to go to Matthew to see what John's actually thinking here. And by the way, as we're moving in that direction, just to throw this out there, I want you to view the Gospels not as 4 separate books independent of each other. I want you to think of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as puzzles, kind of like puzzle pieces, that when you put them together, they reveal the big picture of everything happening in Jesus' ministry. That makes a lot more sense when you get to a story like John that has additional details in other Gospels that put the whole picture together. So Matthew 11, verse number 2, John the Baptist, who was in prison, heard about all the things the Messiah was doing, and so he sent his disciples to ask Jesus, are you the Messiah that we've been expecting, or should we keep looking for somebody else? Jesus is not visiting John. But John's own followers are, and they're telling him about everything that's happening right now in the region. They're saying, hey, Jesus did this amazing thing. Like he turned water into wine. Isn't that cool? Now, can you imagine being John? You're in prison and you're thinking, what's that? Like you did a party trick for a bunch of strangers and I'm still in prison. Man, go back and ask this guy, are you the guy or not? Now, I think John wrestled with some serious doubt. What was God doing? It didn't seem to make sense. Like, why is he still in prison during all of this? Maybe Jesus is the Messiah. Maybe he's not. Maybe it's somebody else. Because if he was the Messiah, wouldn't he get me out of prison after all I've done for him? Like, I've been praying like crazy to be set free. Wouldn't he just spring me loose? Like, with each passing day he's in prison, it probably felt more and more to John like God just wasn't listening. And maybe John felt all alone. Now, get this. Jesus does respond. And let me tell you what Jesus did not say. He didn't say, hey, I'm the guy, so sit tight, Johnny. I'll be there at midnight, because, that's when all the crazy things happen in stories, and I'll bust you out. He didn't say, I've got a lot of strong guys backing me, and they're coming for you. He didn't say, I'm paying for your attorney who will give you a stellar defense. He didn't even say, yeah, of course I'm the guy. I'm the Messiah, period. This is how he responds. Check this out. He says, go back and tell John what you hear and see. The blind can see, the cripple can walk, the lepers are healed, the deaf can hear, the dead are coming back to life. And hey, the good news, it's being taught to everybody, including the poor. And just for good measure, Jesus throws in this in verse number 6. He says, and God blesses those who aren't offended by me. Now, that's hard to figure out if you're John, right? He's healing everybody. He's doing miracles for strangers, and he's telling John, you're blessed if you're not offended by what I'm doing for everybody else and not for you. And he continues to push this message forward, and he's doing miracles and he's ministering as he's supposed to, while John is supposed to keep waiting faithfully, by the way, in prison. And it only gets worse. So Herod throws a birthday party. They've all had way too much to drink. It's already weird enough that he's married his sister-in-law, but it's about to get a little more weird, trust me. His wife's daughter, Salome, comes in, does a little dance, and Herod likes the dance so much, he decides to give her whatever she wants, blank check. Now, what does she want? Does she want a pony or a new phone? Nope. Check this out. She goes back to her mom. She goes, hey, Mom, what do I ask for? And I remember our passage in Mark 6, Herodias was powerless to do anything about John until now. And so she tells her kid, you know what? Go back to Herod and ask for John's head. That's mom of the year right there, okay? Salome asked for John's head. Now, Herod can't go back on his word. He made that declaration in front of everybody, got to save face and whatnot. So now, what you're looking for here in the story is for two angels to come in at the last minute, right? Strike everybody blind, kill all the bad guys while the amazing pyrotechnics go off, and John, in Mel Gibson fashion, comes charging out of his cell, freedom, right? Because that's what's supposed to happen. Good endings, happy endings, simple endings. Jesus never forgot me when I was in my darkest valley kind of ending, right? And those do happen. They happen to a lot of people in Scripture. But John doesn't get a neat, simple, happy ending. The man who served Jesus faithfully, who prepared the way, who baptized him, who actually said, hey, I want to be less and Jesus to be more, and I'm not even worthy to take off his sandals, that guy, he doesn't get rescued. He loses his head. And that's where we struggle, isn't it? We have this view of following Jesus, that somehow it should be easy. And the more I do for God, the more blessing I get, too blessed to be stressed, right? I get the promotion, I get the house, I get healthy, wealthy, wise, I can name it, claim it, it's mine. But this story doesn't fit that narrative. It doesn't make sense. Didn't God hear all the prayers that John offered? Then why didn't he do anything about it? Let's step back and remove all the emotion for a moment from the story. Can we do that? What did John do? Well, he prepared the way for Jesus. He baptized him and he was faithful. So did John serve his purpose? Man, 100%. What was Jesus doing? Well, he was healing the sick. He was raising the dead. He was preaching God's kingdom. Was he serving his purpose? Yeah, he was. So God's purpose and will was carried out. It just wasn't carried out the way that John would have planned it. And that's where we really get hung up. Proverbs 19:21 tells us this, that you can make many plans, but the Lord's purpose will prevail. How many of you have had all kinds of plans and hopes and dreams which took different, maybe even radically different paths? Our youngest son, he was a year old now, he was born last year, and he was supposed to be born in April. But Shayna went to bed one night in February not feeling right. And the next day, she couldn't feel the baby move at all. He wasn't kicking, he wasn't squirming. A couple hours go by, still can't feel anything. So we go to the hospital, and she's really worried. Now, I'm a rock still. Like, I'm okay, we'll be fine. I tend to see things in a more optimistic glass half full kind of view, right? So, but then you see a whole team of nurses, not one or two, like a whole team come in. And then 2 doctors come in, and so now I'm worried. Shayna's been worried, and now it's hitting me, and we learned that she can't go home. In fact, she has to have the baby 8 weeks early now. And that wasn't how we planned this. If for nothing else, we planned April, because every kid in our family has a birthday in January or February, like 6 cousins with birthdays a couple weeks apart. But they prepared us for ventilators, for rushing our son out to the PICU when he was born, which is the prenatal intensive unit. They said he wouldn't be screaming when he came out because they didn't think his lungs would be developed, prepare for a very long hospital stay. None of that stuff was what we planned. And so here I am, and I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to make money. I wanted security for my family. I gave everything up to follow God's calling in a ministry. Let me tell you, it ain't glamorous. Ministry never really is. And we've sacrificed so much and given up so much. And this kind of thing is not supposed to happen for people who sacrifice, right? Haven't I given enough and then some? That's kind of my attitude towards God. Like, we've been so faithful, we serve, and the whole time I'm thinking, God, you owe me. And for the record, that's an incorrect perspective, because God doesn't owe you or me anything. But as it turned out, our son was born, and he was born screaming, which meant his lungs were fully developed. He didn't have to get rushed to the PICU. He didn't even need a feeding tube, but for a day or two. And 15 days later, not the long period they thought, we'd walk out of the hospital with a healthy little boy. Now you might say, Pastor, that's not so bad. That's a better ending than John. Okay, true. But as any parent would understand, that is not a place you want to be. Those were the 15 longest days of my life. It didn't go as planned. And for much of that time, we did not understand what God was doing, and none of it made sense. And we were angry, and we were hurt. It just didn't happen how we thought it should. I want you to remember, you don't have to understand the plan to trust God's purpose. You don't even have to like the plan to trust God's purpose. Some of you have very urgent issues in your life right now. Others are praying for someone who's sick, hoping they get better. There are those of you, you'll have your first birthday or holiday or anniversary with an empty chair in your home because the person you prayed for didn't make it. God could have healed, but he didn't do it. Some of you worked hard at your job, and the economy changed because of the pandemic, and you were furloughed, or worse, you lost your job outright. And you're wondering, man, how do I get through this? Some of you have kids. They're not even serving the Lord right now. They're serving as far from God as possible, and it's breaking you because you raised them to know God, and you did all the things right you should have done. You've prayed, and you've prayed, and you've prayed, and you've prayed. And other people, you see them get healed, and you see other jobs get provided, and other kids come back home to the Father, man, and you're trying to figure out, how come none of my prayers are being answered right now? That doesn't make sense. You don't have to understand the plan to trust God's purpose. We don't interpret God's goodness through our circumstances. We interpret our circumstances through the lens of God's purpose. We believe that no matter what, God is good. He can't be anything but good. We don't have to understand everything to trust in God. And trust me, if you serve God long enough, and if you certainly live long enough, you're going to hit those times where what God is doing or not doing just doesn't make sense. And when those times hit, we want you to know, hey, don't put your faith in the plan. God, just tell me why you haven't healed me, right? Why didn't you stop that horrible act? Why am I still waiting on you to answer my prayers? Don't put your faith in the plan, okay? Don't do that, all right? We always want to know what God's plan is. Well, you know what God's saying? He's saying, hey, just trust my purpose. You can make plans, but the Lord's purpose prevails. As someone committed to following Jesus, man, I kind of stated that my faith is not in the plan. It's in God's purpose. It's not about how I want things to happen. It's not about how I want to see everything play out. I can have ideas and I can have aspirations and hopes, but I'm not placing my faith in what I think should happen. I'm placing my faith in God's purpose. His way is better. His way is wiser. His way is greater. My prayers haven't been answered, but I'm going to pray anyway because I trust God's purpose. He hasn't answered the way I wanted to. He hasn't answered it all maybe, but I'm still trusting God's purpose because His purpose always prevails. I think sometimes we struggle to accept this because it just sounds almost too pie in the sky, feel good. Trust God. That's right, Pastor. I can do that. I can trust on God. But the reality is you struggle to trust God and you're hearing trust God's purpose. It just doesn't make sense to you because it doesn't give you a practical next step. You want a practical next step so bad, but you don't have it, so you just do lip service. I'm going to trust God, and that's it. But what if I told you that even Jesus experienced the situation that John was in and the situations you and I find ourselves in? He's in a place called the Garden of Gethsemane one night. He's in agony, by the way. His heart's got palpitations. His stomach's tied up in knots. He's anxious. He drops to his knees. He pours his heart out to God, and he's saying, hey, Lord, Father, is there another way? Can I skip this? Can we figure something else out? He's talking about the brutal nature of his torment and his death that's going to await him in about 12 hours. He's hoping that God the Father comes to bust him out. He's done the miracles. He's preached the kingdom. He's raised the dead. He's done so much, and now he's in a corner, just like John. And it only makes sense for all the angels of heaven to come and get him out, right? I mean, he's the Son of God. That makes sense. But Jesus prays, it's not about my plan. It's not about my plan. It's about your purpose. God the Father wasn't coming to the rescue. John lost his head. The Son of God is beaten to a pulp. He's unrecognizable. He's nailed half dead to a cross. The sin of all humanity, your sin, my sin, every person who's walked the planet is placed on his shoulders. He's literally carrying it all. And he's doing exactly what God the Father wants him to do. And yet while he's on the cross, he's all alone. He cries out, says, God, why have you left me? And for a brief moment, and for the very first time, the Son of God knew what it was like to feel alone. All those times you prayed and God hadn't answered, where God seemed silent and He didn't make sense, in that moment on that cross, Jesus, He felt it because God was silent. But God wasn't absent. 3 days later, He raised Jesus up from the dead, right? Listen to me. God loved us enough to let His Son suffer so His purpose was fulfilled. Whenever God doesn't make sense, whenever you cry out and you ask Him to heal somebody, to do a miracle, to provide for you, remember this. His silence doesn't mean He's absent. And many times God will hear that prayer and He'll bless you in ways you couldn't imagine. It just might not turn out the way you planned. And that's okay because we can make plans, but God's purpose always prevails. Let me encourage you today. Don't place your faith in your plans. Don't place it all in your strategies. Don't place it anywhere. Place it only in God's purpose. Trust God's purpose. Don't interpret God's goodness through the lens of your circumstances. Interpret your circumstances through the lens of God's purpose. And when you pray and pray and pray and pray some more, and it feels like God isn't listening and God doesn't care, remember to trust in His purpose. We can make plans, but God's purpose always prevails. If you're here this morning watching, you say, Pastor, I got to start trusting in God's purpose. I don't want to keep trusting my plan. In fact, maybe you've been watching and listening and you're just like, you know what, I don't even really know God, but I'm listening to all this and it actually makes sense to me. I'd like to put my trust in God's purpose. Well, here's what we're going to do real quick. I'm going to pray for you. And that's you. You need to say, hey, I want to place my trust in God's purpose for the very first time because you haven't been somebody who's been following God. Do you know that Jesus, when He died on the cross, He extended this open invitation for you to be a part of God's kingdom, for you to actually come in and be a part of His world? All you got to do is accept it. So I want to pray for you specifically. And what we're going to do is we're just going to say a quick prayer. Say, hey, Lord, I need you. I'm putting my trust in you. I accept your invitation to be part of your kingdom and your world. And then your journey is really just going to be beginning. We'll talk more about that here at the end. And then I want to pray for those of you who are already serving God but you're struggling because God seems silent. Remember, he's not absent, but he seems silent. And you've been praying and praying and praying, and you feel like they're just falling on deaf ears. Hey, listen to me. God hears. God hears. Put your trust in his purpose. So, Father, I thank you for who you are. That we serve a good God, a loving God, a God who's in control, a God who might be silent at times, but he's never absent. Lord, I pray first of all for those who want to place their trust in you for the very first time. God, as they open up their hearts and they say, hey, Lord, I want to accept your invitation. I want to be part of your kingdom. Come into my life, man. Make me a part of your world. Lord, I pray that as they begin to surrender their heart over to you and their life over to you, as they put their trust and their faith, God, not in their plans and who they are, but Lord, putting it in you and your purpose, God, I pray that you would cleanse them, that you would make them brand new, God, that you would hit the reset button in their life, Lord, give them a brand new start. Father, I pray for those who are already followers of you, who are already living for you, God, but they are discouraged because it feels like all their prayers are just for nothing, that silence is everywhere right now. Remind them, Lord, that you're not absent. Remind them, God, that you're present. That, Lord, we can make many plans, but your purpose always prevails. I pray, God, that you would encourage them. They would not give up, but they would continue to dig deeper in their prayer life, just to dig deeper in their trust in you and in your purpose, that you got this, Lord, that you got them. And Father, I pray that in those moments, in those seasons where it just doesn't seem to make sense, we've been working hard for you, we've been living for you, we're not getting the breaks, we're not getting rescues, we're not getting provision, we're not getting any of those types of things. Lord, just remind us so much that we're not going through anything your son didn't go through. We're not going through anything that John didn't go through or any other great follower of Christ has gone through. Lord, we're actually in this together with others who've been there before us and are in this season right now. And Lord, even though it doesn't make sense and it may not go our way and the prayers may not be answered, your purpose always prevails. It always does. And as long as we trust in your purpose and not in our plans, we're placing ourselves firmly in your hands, where only good things can really happen to us because you are such a good God. We love you. We praise you. We ask this in your name. Amen. Hey, if you chose to accept God's invitation, then congratulations. Your journey is just beginning, and I want you right now to contact us. Let us know that you made that decision. You can do that a couple of different ways. You can send us a message directly on our Facebook page if you're watching on that platform, or visit radiantchurchsc.com. Contact us there. And hey, we want to celebrate with you, and we want to help you with what your next steps are. Now, Radiant Church is launching this fall in the Seneca Clemson area right here in South Carolina. And so if you would like to learn more about us, you can join our launch team, you can support us by giving, any of those types of things, head to our website, radiantchurchsc.com, or come on out, June 28th, Sunday, June 28th from 4 to 5 p.m., Abernathy Park in Clemson, and we'll get a chance to meet each other, and you'll learn more about us there. Now, we're also holding physical in-person launch team meetings right now, so contact us if you're local. We'll let you know when those meetings are, and when you can participate, we'll get that information to you. But what if you're not local? What if you're watching from a different city or region, and you feel like, hey, Radiant Church, this is my church. I love these messages. I like what God's doing. I like the direction it's going. How can I be a part? Well, I've got great news for you. You can be a part from wherever you are. Contact us. Let us know. We want to help you and walk through what does it look like to be a part of Radiant Church, even if you're watching from another state or city or area. And we would love to connect with you and share that vision with you, okay? But you can be a part of Radiant even if you're not local. That's really exciting. So coming up, hey, on our Facebook page only, right, okay, at 11 a.m., we've got our Radiant Kids preschool lesson. And then the Radiant Kids elementary lesson will come at 11:30 a.m. right after that. And if this message really impacted you, and if God did a work in your life, hey, please don't keep this to yourself. Share it with other people. Share it to your socials. Tag folks. Let them know to watch this, because we believe and we're praying that God will impact their lives as well through this message. And one more time, another reminder, Sunday, June 28th from 4 to 5 p.m., come on out to Abernathy Park in Clemson. We would love to get a chance to meet with you and introduce ourselves to you and get a chance to hear about the vision of Radiant Church and who we are. We got snow cones and activities for your kids. It'll be a blast. We look forward to seeing you there on the 28th, and we'll be right back here again next Sunday, ready to dive into God's Word, another great message. Have an amazing rest of your week, and we hope to see you again on Sunday, June 28th, Abernathy Park in Clemson, 4 to 5 p.m. for our first interest gathering.